So recently I went to visit some friends in Boston for the end of Pesach, actually Newton, Mass, not Boston. And I was coming home late Tuesday night, and I took Amtrak, and then I was standing on the platform at 34th Street, number 1 train, and I saw a man, kind of slight, slim, pale, reddish hair, wearing a yarmulke. And I started to worry for him. And, you know, here's my Jewish mind. I thought back to the Holocaust, and I thought of all those beautiful yeshiva students who were killed, murdered during the Holocaust. And somehow I felt drawn to him, and I decided I would protect him. Waiting for the number 1 at 34th Street. So I and he had this like female companion, but I decided I would protect him. And I decided to go a little closer. I mean, I wasn't stalking him, and they didn't notice, but I'm just like, okay, no one better touch this guy. And then suddenly, there was a street musician, tall man of color, saxophone, and he started playing, of all songs, Hatikva. And I thought, what was going on here? Was I in exile or was I home? And I started to sing along in a soft voice. Okay, so I was doing this softly, but I was hoping somehow the young man with the yarmulke would hear me and know that I was Jewish too and that I was protecting him. That went on for a while. And then the musician started singing Am Yisrael Chai. And so again, I started singing softly.
Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Okay, so
did this really happen?
It really happened. I didn't give him money. I was nowhere near him. I was protecting the guy with the yarmulke. So I started wondering, like, did this guy know I was Jewish by now? But the man and his friend seemed not to care about me or about my grand plan to protect him. But here's what I experienced. In a dimly lit, dirty subway station, a stranger amongst strangers, just wanting to get home, I had suddenly become someone who was determined to stand up for her people, who was feeling threatened on their behalf, on my own behalf, and exiled in my native city. After all, I too grew up in Brooklyn. I was a Jew ready to defend my fellow Jews. And then a moment later, when I heard these iconic Jewish songs in this subway station, tunes that I was taught as a small child, I again became a New Yorker, still at home in the city I've called home all my life. The ground I was on began to shift and feel holy. Once again, I felt like I belonged as a Jew and as a human. So those who know what the portion is this week know where I'm headed. Kedoshim, holiness. This is how the Parsha begins. Daber el kol adat b'nei Yisrael va'amarta alehem kedoshim tehiyu. So God said to Moshe, speak to all the congregation of Israel and say to them, be holy. Why? Ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem. Because I, your God, Adonai, am holy. This is God's identity. This is the essence of who God is, according to God, holy. And we should be holy because God is holy. We should imitate God on this earth. So there's a well-known religious concept called imitatio Dei. It's Latin and it has its origins in Greek philosophy. And what it means is we should reflect God in our actions. We should imitate God. We are God's mirror in action. We were created to reflect God, and our actions, right? It's not just a static mirror. We should reflect God in all our actions, which means to be holy. But what does it mean to be holy? So kadosh is defined in different ways as separating or being separate, as consecrated or devoted to sacred purposes, as special, sacred, holy, elevated. Whatever it means, I think we know it when we feel it. I think we know it in our bodies. I think that might be why we're in this very room. When our voices soar and our hearts are open and we feel like we can touch something higher, larger than ourselves. It's not always accessible, but maybe there's always potential for holiness. That's what I felt on the subway platform, like I was touching something higher and larger than myself, whether it was sort of stepping into Jewish history or it was sort of having almost, there's an injunction in this week's Parsha, which I'll talk about in a minute, to love the stranger. But that night, I felt like the stranger was loving me with his music. Parshat Kedoshim, the Parsha of Kedoshim, is chock full of opportunities for holiness. Share your food with the poor. Leave the corners of your field bare for them to harvest. Don't pick your vineyards bare. Pay your employees on time. Don't make them wait for their wages. Don't put a stumbling block before the blind. Don't curse the deaf. And then some laws that might be harder for us to understand. The laws of shatnez, not mixing wool and linen. Don't eat the fruit of a newly planted tree for 3 years. Don't swear falsely. Don't profane God's name. Holiness is embedded in our entire lives. Some of the laws make deep, intimate sense to us, and some don't. But each is an opportunity to find holiness in our daily lives. The Ishbitzer Rebbe, the Mei Shiloach, said to be holy is to be always devoted and ready for the moment when the reality of God peers through ordinary reality and enlightens your vision with a higher light. Imagine that Hashem, that God is constantly present, ready and waiting to give the moment of light to you, to save you from your ordinary negativity. So if your sort of resting place is kind of negative, this is the text for you. Stand right there, he continues, and wait and hope that your vision will be enlightened. You don't have to be already holy, but be ready for the moment of holiness to uplift you. Be in process. It may occur at any moment. It is experiential and intermittent. It suffuses ordinary reality when the moment is right and when you are focused. Now, I wasn't really focused that night until I knew that I was absolutely needed to protect the life of this man. But then I became very focused. And I did feel that God's something was peering through ordinary reality. That something happened on that subway platform to lift it from just like, oh my God, I'm so tired. I can't stand being here. I'm dying to get home, to I was connected to Jewish history. I was connected to something much larger than myself. It's a reason to ride the subways. This Parsha includes two crucial mitzvot. One is to love the neighbor like yourself, va'ahavta et reacha kamocha, to love the person who is like you, your fellow Jew, like yourself. The other is to love the stranger. Va'ahavta lo kamocha, love the stranger like yourself. Why? Ki gerim heyitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then at the end of both of these mitzvot, God says, Ani Adonai Elohechem. That is who I am. I am God, your God. Right? My name is, as it were, embedded or sealed in these mitzvot. But they're so aspirational. We can spend our lives, right, loving the neighbor as ourselves. It seems so difficult. I mean, we live our lives sort of trying to survive and get through the day and succeed and make a good impression. And what's left to actually love the neighbor like yourself? But I think when we realize that a neighbor is just like ourselves, right? With sensitivities and dreams and hurts and wounds and traumas and strivings, it becomes easier, right? To realize that the person beside you is not just there to torture you, but, is coming from a place we can't even imagine. And I love what Grace Paley says in her Midrash on happiness about the stranger. We should love particularly the stranger in all his or her difference, who, because we were strangers in Egypt, deserve special goodness for life, or at least until the end of strangeness. Right? The hardest person to love in the room is the one who's most strange. So how can we help make them less strange? So that's where I was on the subway platform, with my fellow Jew who I wanted to love and protect, even though he didn't really care about me, and a stranger who in this case I felt was loving me, even though he wasn't aware of his own mitzvah, as far as I knew. In all my strangeness and alienation at that moment, until I stopped feeling strange. The prophet Isaiah tells us the whole world is full of holiness. He says that when he describes the angels calling to one another, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melo Kol Haaretz Kivodo. Holy, holy, holy God of hosts, whose glory fills all the world, the earth. The world is too full of holiness and God's glory, but most of the time we're completely oblivious. How can we become a little bit more attuned to this holiness? Amidst all the noise and danger of this time, can we find places where we stop arguing, stop feeling defensive, stop blaming, stop yelling, and instead call out to each other, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. It could be in our synagogues, it could be in our kitchens, it could be in our community, it may be in conversation with a friend, it may be in studying Torah. It could be out in the woods or by the ocean, or even on a dirty subway platform, surrounded by strangers. Kadosh, 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 the whole world is filled with your glory.